right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Labster's So Uplifted conference. I'm Dan Pratt, one of our K-12 sales managers here at Labster, and I'm going to be moderating this session, which is Teacher Talk High School, where we're going to discuss getting the most out of virtual labs, pros and cons of teaching high school science classes with virtual simulations. Before we start, I do want to remind everyone to stay until the end of the session because that is when we are going to announce the winner of our So Uplifted summer giveaway drawing. But just before we get started, few housekeeping items to get out of the way. First off, this session is being recorded, as are all the sessions here, so you are going to receive that recording in your email afterwards. We're also going to leave plenty of time at the end for Q&A, so feel free to put your questions in that Q&A button at the bottom, and we will get to those afterwards. And last but not least, please send any additional questions after the session to marketing@labster.com. So as I mentioned before, my name is Dan Pratt. I'm a sales manager here at Labster, overseeing partnerships with high schools in the western part of the United States, essentially everything west of the Mississippi. I've been working with software and technology sales for the past 5 years or so, give or take, with a focus on educational technology for the last 2. And now I want to introduce our special guest today, who's going to be providing us with some awesome insight on how she uses Labster, Emily Dehoff. Emily's been teaching science for 15 years. She's been in career and technical education at the North County Career Center in rural Vermont for the last 5, where she developed their program in animal system science. She has 4 lab rooms, also uses her own farm with 60 organics, wholesome cows as field station. This summer, she's also working on developing the curriculum for a brand new statewide animal science program, which will be a full year, half-day course. So welcome, Emily. It is so great to have you here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Dan.
Awesome. Yeah. So let's dive into things. As I just said, your school is a technical high school in rural Vermont. So I guess to get started, would you mind just telling us a bit more about your students and what you teach?
Sure. So geographically, we're located right by the Canadian border in northern Vermont. So we're pretty isolated and pretty rural. We also are the largest school district geographically. So some of my students travel up to an hour just to get to school. So we're pretty rural and we're pretty isolated, but we still have a school of about 800, high school of about 800 students. So we're not this tiny little school. And most of our community is blue collar, hardworking. We are the 3rd largest ag producing county in the state of Vermont. So we still have a lot of people working really hard every day. A lot of my students in career and technical education are first time college bound family members. So yeah, it's pretty unique, I think, to our area, especially in career and technical ed. But for 12 years before that, I was in the science department. And a lot of my students there were college bound and family were college educated. So it's a much kind of diverse here, especially in career and technical ed. So I don't know if that answered your question, but a little bit about rural Vermont and science up here.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks so much. So I guess talking about virtual labs and kind of getting into Labster, how do you include them in your teaching plan? How have you used them in the past?
Well, like everyone else, we went virtual at the end of last year, and I scrambled to try to figure out how to turn a career and technical education science program. I was in the midst of, doing blood smears in animal system science. How do I turn that into online learning? So I began searching for virtual labs, and I stumbled upon many different ones, and I settled on Labster. And how did I incorporate it into my curriculum is, like most teachers, the first question I asked is, how will this lab deepen my students' understanding of a specific scientific concept, right, from class? So I would basically ask myself, what is it that they need to know? And then from there, I would begin to peruse the vast catalog you guys have of many different virtual simulated labs. So then I would actually go through the lab itself, and teachers that are watching this, that we never have enough time to do anything. But thankfully, I think in the shutdown last year, I had a little bit more time to be able to sit down and go through these simulations. So, that's the first question I would ask is, how is this going to deepen my students' understanding? And then, because I'm career and technical education, I really wanted my students to have an opportunity to apply what they were learning. And so these simulated labs are really fascinating in the sense that it's this game-like world that my students enter into the scientific laboratory or whatever it is that they're doing. Let's just say we're doing lab safety, good introductory one. They enter into this simulated world where they are actually applying what they're learning. And so they do a chemical spill and they have to figure out how to clean it up. And I really, really like that a lot about the Labster simulations. So I really wanted to look at kind of answering the question, how can I teach microbiology without a microscope? Because that is the world that we were facing. How can my students still do a hematology lab without having access to the bovine blood, right? So Labster was incorporated in answering those questions. And I also incorporate Labster in as a pre-assessment. I think it works really, really well as a pre-assessment, especially, I think the one that stood out the most was lab safety, where I hadn't seen my students. I had them go through the lab safety simulation. 2 weeks later, we started a hybrid model. That was this fall. And so the students came back in, and I was actually quite surprised at how much they retained from that 30-minute lab safety simulation. So it pretty much solidified my belief in maybe using some of these as a pre-assessment for the students.
Amazing.
So
Awesome.
that's a few ways I have them in my teaching plan.
Awesome. So yeah, like you said, it's all about the students, right? What works best? How are they going to learn? When it comes to how they responded, how did they respond? Was there anything that really surprised you?
No, nothing really surprised me, but I will tell the teachers out there that are listening, they stumbled getting through the full lab. When I started this fall, sorry, let me backtrack. When I started this last year, we were fully remote, right? We were in a hybrid model. And so I would meet with them over a screen like this and be like, blah, 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 and here's your login to Labster, and we're gonna try Labster. And then off I let them go, and they really struggled with doing it on their own without my help. So if I was gonna do it again, I would probably have a screen like this and walk them through the very first lab. Again, these were mainly freshmen and sophomores, so they didn't know what they were doing. So, but really, once they got the hang of it, I had no problems. Those teachers that are listening right now know the population that dropped off the face of the earth weren't engaged because they were never engaged. But my students seemed to really enjoy it. No complaints.
Awesome. So we just spoke about a little bit about kind of what wasn't working at first. When it comes to pros and cons, the meat of the situation, what would those be? What's working? What else isn't working? Well,
the pros, okay, the number one reason why I like Labster personally, fellow teachers that are out there, especially for my animal system science course, which is an advanced course, my students have access to these $1 million laboratories that, which I could for you on my non-$1 million laboratory. And so they're utilizing equipment that they might not ever see, even if they go off to college. If they just do an undergrad, they might not see it until grad or PhD studies. So for me, having my rural high school students exposed to these $1 million laboratories, even in a simulated world, was really, really neat, because then we could come back and talk about it. And they would kind of laugh at, the plastic transfer pipettes I'm using when they just finished, a really nice lab. But whatever, it is what it is. So that was, for me, one of the biggest pluses, was that my students were able to be exposed to how science works in these fascinating laboratories. And also, it's very game-like for the kids. So I like that. Other simulations that I was looking at during the first shutdown really weren't as engaging for me. And I know we live in this generation, we live with, where we're teaching these students that their attention span, I think now, is like 11 minutes long. So we're dealing with this gaming generation. So that was really a pro, was hooking the kids, right? Yeah, those to me were my cons, or I mean pros. I think the only con I stumbled upon, oh wait, there was another pro, how it all linked to my Google Classroom teachers. Oh my God. Or is this another question, Dan? But the amount of time it saved, because Labster automatically generates grades from quizzes and labs and automatically puts it into your Google Classroom grade book. When the first time that happened, Dan, I was like, wait a minute, I think I just saved him so much. Honestly, I think I did a little dance. I was so happy, like, oh my gosh, this is actually saving me a lot of time. Wonderful, wonderful piece that it just imports those grades right into whatever your platform is that you're using. We just happen to be Google Classroom. So I think the only con, we're on that, right? The con would be, well, for my freshmen and my sophomores, not my advanced class, but my freshmen and sophomores, the language, the vocabulary was difficult for them on quite a few of the labs. They just didn't have the content knowledge. So they struggled and then gave up. So what I learned from that is that I can't use certain ones as pre-assessments. I have to pre-teach first, which was really difficult in the virtual world, or not when we were virtual. But my advice for teachers would be to obviously view whichever ones you want to use first, and ensure that your students have the content knowledge.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. And I know you just mentioned advice, for a bunch of different aspects of using Labster. Is there any one major piece of advice or any other advice that you'd give to a high school science teacher about how to get the most out of teaching with Labster?
Sure, but high school science teachers, that time is something we never have enough of, ever, 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 ever. And my advice to you would be to ask for professional development time from your district, from your administration, to allow you that time to dive into everything Labster has to offer. Once the school year started, Dan, it was just running to keep up. And so I would do a lab. I would go through the simulation, and sometimes I only got halfway through and I'm like, okay, good enough for the students, click, 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 go. And it wasn't good enough for the students, because the second half was something I never went over and they were confused and blah, blah, blah. So my advice for teachers, if you're very much interested in taking on Labster and using it in your classroom, which I recommend that you do, is to make sure that you're giving yourself professional development time to understand and utilize everything that Labster has to offer you. That would, other than that, we just need time, Dan.
Yeah, I hear you. I think everyone's very relieved to have this past year behind us. And I guess my last question is, let's think about that, right? We're moving towards the fall now. How do you think you're going to be using Labster in this upcoming school year? Are you going to be using the new supplementary curriculum resources like the lab manuals and reports now, and 3D videos, 2D images, that type of stuff?
Since, Dan, the year just ended and we made it, I haven't thought too long and hard about the fall, but a little bit. So I'll give you the bit I'm kind of waiting to turn my brain off for a few weeks here.
I hear you.
Being in the small but yet mighty Green Mountain state of Vermont, we're at 81%, I think, vaccination, right? We're at an 81% vaccination rate right now. So we are going to be opening. I can guarantee we're going to be opening. I mean, we just never even got hit that hard from COVID, probably due to our, obviously due to our rural, isolated nature here. So I am anticipating being back full time. So what is that going to look like with Labster? Is something that I have been contemplating a little bit, and I'm going to continue to use it because, especially for my advanced animal science class, all the microbiology topics and hematology and, some DNA, but they're not going to be doing it at home. So I thought about maybe we do some in class together, but I also realize that there's a few times during the year that I have to go away for conferences. And I think Labster would be a wonderful activity for the students to be doing with a substitute, right? Because it's self-directed learning. So I'm trying to think of ways in which I can still incorporate Labster while they're sitting in front of me, which is going to be interesting.
Yeah, it's crazy. There are definitely a lot of different ways that Labster can be used. So,
right, especially now that we're going to be back in person, because it really is a fascinating world, this virtual world, and our kids are so connected with our students are so connected to this virtual world that I want to keep it and dive a little bit deeper, because now with me there with them, I can answer any questions they have. You see where so I'm not exactly sure where it's going to fit, Dan, but it's going to fit.
yeah, awesome. Glad to hear that. But yeah, thanks so much for a great conversation. I definitely want to leave some time to open things up for the Q&A. So for everyone listening, if you have any questions for Emily or myself, feel free to use that Q&A button now, and we'll go through and answer some questions live here. So I'm going to go ahead and pull that up so I can see. So here's our first question. Did you use the supplements like lab reports, theory pages, etc., along with the simulations this past year?
So great question. I'm sorry to say I did not. I used one lab manual. I am going to be honest with you. I really didn't have time to dive deep. Every day was a race. And so I plan on diving deeper this year. So no, I did not, sorry. I used 1 or 2 lab manuals, which were great, and some quizzes that were already created. But this year, I didn't have my students collaborating at all. Dan, what I understand is that I'm going to be able to have my students collaborate. They can work on labs together now. Correct?
So that's one of the things that the lab reports allow them to do. It's still more of the individual simulation go through and then collaborate and hypothesize.
That's right.
To this external supplement.
Right. So I plan on diving deeper into all of that. I mean, I can, like I said, envision my students even working in the same room, collaborating on a lab, even though they're on 2 separate computers. I mean, this is just the world that the students live in now, so.
Awesome. So I also saw another one pop into the chat here, so I don't want to make sure I don't miss that. I think we might have already touched on it, but about have you thought about how many simulations or labs you're planning to use when you're back in person, or is that?
Yes. So we have a block schedule here at the Career Center and the high school. We are attached to the high school as well. And so I see my students every other day, either an A day or a B day, and I see them. Well, my animal system science course I see for 3 hours a day. My other courses are 80 minutes a day. So when I start looking ahead, because I see them every other day, and I look at the curriculum that I've created, the scope and sequence that I created, it looks like probably once every 2 or 3 weeks, a Labster simulation can fit into my curriculum. So I'm assuming maybe once or twice a month. I always start off with lab safety. I really like the lab safety one. Just so you know, audience watching, I had my students At the beginning of this year, one of the first things we did was Labster lab safety. And then within a couple of weeks, we began a hybrid model. And so the students came back into my laboratory. And Dan, you asked me if there's anything that like kind of shocked me or surprised me. I was actually very surprised at how much my students adhered to the lab safety rules, expectations set out in the simulator that they brought into my room here. Like the girls were tying back their hair without me even saying anything before we even started the actual lab safety portion directed by me. Labster did a great job of teaching them what they needed to know. So that was surprising and really cool that they learned a lot just from that simulation.
Awesome.
So I love the lab safety one. There's the trophic level one is pretty, there's a lot. Trophic level one I like. The biosecurity one is really cool, a little bit above my students' cognitive ability, but they got it.
That was the next question. What was your favorite lab and why? Sounds like lab safety, but I don't want to speak for you.
No, I mean, that's just such a generic one, but I mean, the lab, for me, it's a great start. It's the best one for me out of all the ones I saw. It's the best one to start with because the students. So if I'm going to say my favorite, maybe it is lab safety because it's my favorite one to start with. I teach semester-long courses, so I had 6 groups go through this lab starting the year or the quarter. I'm sorry, not even quarter, semester. Sorry, this year's been such a confusing schedule with lab safety because it's pretty easy. So they get to know how this simulation is going to work. And it actually is so well done when it comes to how I want safety in my own laboratory. So I agreed with it. I thought it went above and beyond what I normally do in the lab. So that was, that was really good. But the cell organelle one is pretty cool. It kind of trips up the kids a little bit, but it's funky and cool. I like the cell organelle. The trophic level one with the elephant and the giraffes. That one is a cool, if anyone teaches environmental science, I also teach environmental conservation. So yeah, I don't know, there's a lot of neat ones out there.
Awesome. Yeah, with the 200 simulations, I guess it's a hard question to answer.
Yeah, but definitely start with the lab safety, you guys. It's the easiest one for the kids to wrap their heads around.
Awesome. So next question here. Obviously, planning time was so limited for teachers this year. How did Labster help you save time in lesson planning and grading?
Oh my God. I had no idea. I was like, okay, we're going to do Labster. I did some research online, really enjoyed Labster out of all the simulations, purchased it, got it, downloaded it, entered the code, spent maybe 2 or 3 hours looking through the catalog and then looking at my scope and sequence. No, and then messing with some of the actual simulations. And then I had to figure out how I import that into my Google Classroom, which took a second, but it's easy. Imports it right into the Google Classroom. I sat back. This was like, whenever there was a Labster day, I just sat back because I wasn't performing that day. I didn't have to perform that day. Labster was performing that day. The students were performing that day. And then I would get all this information back about how long it took them, how they did on the questions, their final assessment grade. And literally, teachers, I sat back for once and let something else do the teaching and the grading. It was, honestly, I think I told you I had a little dance party, Dan, when the grades all popped into my Google Classroom grade book. And I'm like, wait a second. I don't have to spend 3 hours grading this right now. So that was nice.
Awesome.
Did I answer the question?
I think so. Yeah. So next question. We're considering purchasing Labster for biochem and physics. We are in a rural district, and my colleague who teaches agri-science and is the advisor for Future Farmers of America here is a potential holdout. What would you say to her?
Oh my God, I'd say we're twins. I am the FFA advisor. I used to teach agri-science, but now I'm teaching animal system science. I'm sorry, what was the question? I got so distracted that my twins out there somewhere.
She might be a potential holdout. So what would you say to her about Labster?
she's a potential holdout. What would I say? I would say that with this generation that we're dealing with, and again, I'm rural as well, right? With this generation that we're dealing with, this gaming, short attention span generation, we have to adapt, right? You guys in science, right? We got 3 options: move, adapt, or die, right? And we have to adapt. And Labster, for me, is adapting to this environment in which the kids are so comfortable using. So I don't know what the holdout would be, because my students enjoy it, they're engaged. And I think, I know this is the future. And also, lastly, I don't know what it's like funding wise in your rural area, but these kids have access to these laboratories that are honestly like multi-million-dollar laboratories. And so our students are seeing things that some of them may never see. Some of these laboratory techniques that they'll never see. And also, lastly, Dan, what was really cool too is that some of these experiments would take the results would take days, hours, days, or the results come in within minutes, right? So there's just so many advantages to having the students go through these simulations, especially I think for my rural kids, who many may never leave this county ever in their lifetime. So hope I answered it.
Yeah, thank you. I know we have time for at least a couple more here. So here's when you mentioned walking them through one Labster at the beginning of the year because they needed help kind of learning how to use Labster in general. Were they able to be more independent as the year went on?
So just so you know, when we started the year, we were fully remote, so I wasn't able to walk them through. The second semester, we were hybrid, and I was able to walk them through. And I will tell you, for me, and it could have been I just got better at it as well because I was new to Labster, walking them through that group was much more confident and able to complete the labs through Labster than my group that I just kind of like, good luck, threw it at them. But I don't know how many teachers out there would agree that the start of this year was just, we're trying to make it. So awesome. I would definitely recommend walking them through.
Great. So this next question might be more of a question for me. You talked about funding. I know you mentioned that in one of your previous answers here. Does Labster qualify for ESSER funding or COVID relief funding? The answer from my end is yes. Yes, it does. And we'd be happy to have that conversation with you as well. But the short answer is yes, it does.
Yeah, I was able to get Labster through ESSER funds. So, or GEER funds. There's another one. We have GEER too, GEER. I don't know if that's Vermont or nationwide, governor, something. But anyways.
Awesome.
And I thought the price was pretty, I mean, if you don't mind me talking, I mean, I don't know what they are now, but when I contacted you guys less than a year ago, when Zach quoted me, I was like, whoa, that's not bad at all. When you look at lab equipment, when I just bought a new laminar flow machine, and then I look at Labster and I'm like, you guys are way cheaper than the laminar flow machine.
Yeah, that's our goal is to empower the next generation of science students. So glad to hear that it's
cool.
It's not something out of their reach. Another one, apart from Google Classroom, what other learning management system does Labster integrate with? So I can handle that one. So we integrate with most major LMS. So Google Classroom, Blackboard, Canvas, Brightspace, D2L, Sakai. I feel like I'm missing a couple. It is on our website, and we're always happy to have that conversation to see if it does integrate with your learning management system, but most major learning management systems do. We also have our own internal learning management system, Access Method. that really allows students to access seamlessly as well. And you still get all of that insight into grades and that stuff as well. All right, so we can jump to the next question. Follow up to the agri-science question. She's concerned that there are not enough simulations for her course. So that would be the holdout.
Yes, I would agree. There aren't a lot for agri-science. I think, I'm trying to think which ones I used for agri-science. I did the cell, right? I mean, for me, I was looking at whether for a semester-long course, I wanted 3 simulations, right? Year-long course, I was looking at, this was at the beginning. I just wanted 3. I needed, 3 or 4. And so for agri-science, I did, of course, the lab safety. I did the cell. I'm trying to remember which one, what other ones I did, but there were the biosecurity ones a bit over the kids' heads for what we're doing for biosecurity and agri-science. But I can't remember offhand. There was a DNA one, a genetics one that I did, which actually uses farm animals for the genetics unit. So it actually fits really nicely with it. But there was 4 or 5. If you don't mind me asking, how is it a semester-long course or a year-long course? And plus, Dan, they have access to the different, I think when Zach sent me the information, I was able to see at least all the different labs that were available. And from there, I took my scope and sequence and said, oh, okay, this could go with this could go with this, right? You guys have that,
exactly.
Right?
So you'll have full access to the full catalog. And for those who missed our first session at noon Eastern time today, kind of the kickoff session, they did share from our product team kind of a roadmap of new simulations that we're gonna be releasing, which may fit into that coursework as well. So you'll be able to see the recording afterwards. And I realized thank you, someone in the chat, Schoology is another major LMS that we integrate. One that I don't know how that one slipped my mind, because I know it's very popular in the high school space. Another question here, what is your take in VR technology integration into Labster?
Is that for me?
I can talk kind of Labster's take in general. I don't know if you have any opinions on how VR could help improve, make it different.
I don't really have. No, I'm kind of like, with that.
No worries at all.
Sorry, that one. Whoever asked that, you got me on that one.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think VR is the way that the future is leaning towards VR. As
That's right.
Different devices come out, it becomes more affordable. Labster previously actually did work in Google Daydream VR technology, so you were able to access the simulations through Google Daydream helmet, kind of get that fully immersed. Since Daydream is end of life, COVID happened, building out more content's been our #1 priority. Is it something that might come in the future? Possibly. I wouldn't imagine that we wouldn't go down that road again in the future, but right now it's not an option. But as I said, I think as the technology gets more advanced, more cost affordable, it is a really cool and immersive way to really feel like you're almost in a lab. Once haptic gloves are available, so students might get some of that feel.
Yeah.
The technology is amazing. And in the future, any integrations with Labster, I think, would just add to that experience.
So I actually see a question here. About error in experiment?
Yeah.
Can I answer that one? Okay. So what's neat? One thing I want to talk about a pro with Labster is that the students can make mistakes and the lab doesn't blow up. Although in one of them it does set on fire and all this other stuff. But anyways, and you got to. So there are some interesting pieces to that. But your question is, if there is an error in an experiment, how long will it take Labster to rectify? They don't let you go that far into an error. So if the students are making a mistake, the person who's running the hands, this person who's talking to you, won't let you go down that road very far. So you can screw up and then they're going to have you redo it. Does that make sense? And it's actually really cool because in my laboratory, we have time constraints, like all teachers do. We have time constraints. And in Labster, there are no time constraints, right? And so if this student makes many errors and keeps making errors until they get it right, it's okay, because you're not looking going, oh my God, the bell's gonna ring in 5 minutes and Johnny still needs to clean the blah, blah, blah. So I hope that answered the question, but they don't let you go so far into the experiment that you've ruined it by your mistakes.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think when it comes to, let's say, any glitches or scientific mistakes from Labster's end, I don't know if the question, I don't know which way the question read, but always let us know. Typically it's almost immediate if it is a major mistake. I mean, we do have a great quality control team here who make sure that there aren't a lot of mistakes in there. But if you ever see something, we want it to be rectified and fixed right away. And I think we probably have time for one more question here. As faculty, do we have permission to add content into Labster?
Ooh, good question.
That is a good question. I can handle it from Labster's point of view. The simulations itself, the core, what Emily was using, they're not customizable. You're not able to go in and add your own lab. You can't go in and build your lab as of today. These supplemental resources that we have incorporated allow for more of that customization, whereas you're able to download a lab manual beforehand. And if you go in and see any language that your students might not comprehend beforehand in our theory pages, in that lab manual, you can correct that. You can download it into a Google Sheet and go in and make sure that you're explaining it for your students. That way, as they're going through, they read this beforehand, they go through the lab. Same with the lab reports afterwards, where the students are kind of working together, hypothesizing. You can customize those however you want. You can even take the questions that we have throughout Labster and customize those through a Google Doc as well. So within the simulation, they're not able to be customized, but if you want the students to go through separately, do a quiz afterwards, you're able to kind of customize things that way. So I'm not sure, Emily, if there's anything you'd add there, but hopefully that answers the question.
I only was able to dive into customizing the assessments. That's it. I haven't had time to dive into the manuals and all that, but I felt good being able to at least customize the assessment portion of it. So gear it more for my audience.
Awesome. So it looks like that is all of the questions that we had today. So now it's actually time to announce the winner of our So Uplifted Summer Giveaway drawing. So congratulations to Greg Posen from Palm Harbor University High School. So you'll be receiving your $50 Amazon gift card via email afterwards. So congratulations and thanks so much for joining. But that wraps up our session today. So first I want to thank everyone who joined us for joining. And thank you again, Emily, for sharing your experience with us today. I think it was a great conversation. Couple of just follow-ups. Everyone's going to be receiving a recording of the session, as I mentioned, as well as all the conference sessions. So if you want to learn more about the future roadmap, anything like that, you'll get those recordings through email by next week. Make sure to send any follow-up questions to marketing@labster.com if anything comes up. And be sure to check out session number 4 today with astronaut Mike Massimino. He's going to be having a chat with our CEO of Labster, and that's going to be really awesome coming up soon. So thanks again, everyone, for joining. Thank you again, Emily, and I hope everyone enjoys the rest of your week.